The moon hung full and heavy over the stone courtyard, casting silver shadows across the faces of those who gathered beneath it. The air tasted of rain about to fall, of secrets about to be spilled, of destinies about to collide. Luma Bloodpetal stood at the edge of the crowd, her white hair gleaming like starlight against the crimson fabric of her dress, her pale skin luminous in the moonlight. She had not come here by accident. She had come with a purpose that burned in her chest like a hidden flame. The auction house was a relic from another era, all crumbling columns and weathered stone, where the desperate came to sell and the powerful came to buy. Tonight, beneath that swollen moon, they were selling men, warriors fallen on hard times, criminals paying debts, broken soldiers with nowhere else to turn. Luma moved through the crowd with fluid grace, her eyes scanning each face that was dragged onto the platform, assessing, calculating, searching for something she could not name but would know when she saw it. Then he appeared, and the world tilted on its axis. They pulled him from the shadows, this man who moved like violence contained in flesh, who stood 7 feet of corded muscle and barely leashed fury. His black hair fell past his shoulders in tangled waves, his beard rough and unkempt. But even in chains, even in rags, he carried himself like a king surveying his kingdom. His eyes, dark as midnight and twice as dangerous, swept over the crowd with something between contempt and calculation. He did not cower. He did not bow. He stood on that platform as though he owned it, as though every person staring at him existed only because he allowed it. Luma felt her breath catch, felt something ancient and knowing stir in the depths of her soul. This was no ordinary man. This was no broken warrior or desperate fool. This was something else entirely, something that called to the wildness in her own blood, the fierce independence she had cultivated like a garden of thorns around her heart. She had come here to buy a man who would give her children, who would serve her purpose and ask no questions, who would be strong enough to survive but broken enough to obey. She had come here believing she knew exactly what she wanted. But looking at him now, at the way moonlight carved shadows across the brutal beauty of his face, at the way his chains seemed like mere suggestions he could shatter at will, she realized she had been searching for something far more dangerous than a simple transaction. The auctioneer began his practice speech, listing the man's attributes with the enthusiasm of someone selling livestock. Strong, skilled in combat, trained in multiple weapons, no known family. No debts beyond the one that brought him here. Perfect, the auctioneer said, for labor or guard work or whatever private purposes a buyer might require. His voice dripped with insinuation, and Luma felt rage flicker hot and fast through her veins at the way men in the crowd leered and whispered. The bidding started low. Luma waited, patient as a hunter, watching the numbers climb. She had wealth, inherited from a family line that stretched back into legend, coin earned through her own skill with blade and bargain. She could outbid anyone here, but she wanted to see who else was interested, wanted to understand what she was truly buying. When the moment felt right, when the auctioneer's voice began to rise toward the final call, she stepped forward into the light. Her voice cut through the murmur of the crowd like a blade through silk. 5,000 gold. The courtyard fell silent. Men turned to stare at her, this woman in her red dress with her white hair and her unflinching gaze. The auctioneer blinked, momentarily speechless. No one countered. No one dared. 5,000 gold was more than most of them would see in a lifetime. More than this man was worth by any practical measure. But Luma had not bid on his practical value. She had bid on the fierce intelligence in his eyes, on the power barely contained beneath his skin, on the promise of something she could not yet name but needed more than breath itself. Going once, going twice. Sold. Before we begin the story, I want to thank everyone who supports the channel and loves our Alpha King romances. In the pinned comment, you'll find a special selection of the best Amazon books that inspire our stories. If you purchase any book through those links, you'll be directly supporting the channel and helping us create more stories. Tell us where you're watching from and how old you are in the comments. I hope you enjoy the story. The word fell like a hammer, binding them together in ways neither yet understood. The crowd began to disperse, disappointed or relieved, whispering among themselves about the mad woman who had paid a fortune for a single slave. Luma ignored them all. She moved through the thinning crowd with purpose, approaching the platform where guards were unlocking his chains, preparing to transfer him to her custody. He watched her approach with those midnight eyes, his expression unreadable. Up close, he was even more magnificent and more dangerous than she had imagined. Scars crossed his arms and chest, visible through the tears in his ragged shirt, each one a story written in violence and survival. His hands, even free of chains, looked like they could break stone or cradle something precious with equal ease. The guard handed her the ownership papers and a key to the iron collar still locked around his throat. She took them both, then gestured for the guards to step back. They obeyed reluctantly, hands on their weapons, clearly uncomfortable leaving a woman alone with such a dangerous acquisition. Luma stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough to see the slight rise and fall of his chest, the pulse beating strong in his throat. She lifted the key, then paused, her eyes meeting his. "What is your name?" she asked quietly, her voice for him alone. The question seemed to surprise him. His eyes narrowed, searching her face for tricks or traps. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together deep in the earth. "Rhaegar," he said simply. Nothing more. No family name, no title, no explanation. Just that single word offered like a challenge. "Rhaegar," she repeated, tasting the name, feeling the way it sat on her tongue. "I am Luma Bloodpetal. I have purchased you. Do you understand what that means?" Something flickered in his eyes, gone too fast to name. "I understand that you paid gold for a man in chains," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "That you now hold papers that say I belong to you." She reached up and unlocked the collar, pulling it from his throat and letting it fall to the ground with a dull clang. The skin beneath was raw and red, and she fought the urge to touch it, to soothe the hurt she saw there. "I have need of you," she said, her voice steady, despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "I need a man who is strong, who is skilled, who can give me children and help me build the future I have planned. I do not need a broken thing or a frightened thing. I need someone who understands what I offer and what I require in return." "And what do you offer?" he asked, something almost like curiosity threading through the careful blankness of his expression. She smiled then, slow and dangerous. "Freedom of a sort. Purpose. A chance to be more than a man sold at auction. I will not beat you. I will not starve you. I will treat you with the respect a warrior deserves if you prove yourself worthy of it. But you will obey me, in all things, without question, without hesitation. That is the price of what I offer." He was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving hers. The moon painted them both in shades of silver and shadow, and the air between them felt charged, electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. "And if I refuse?" he asked quietly. "Then I will sell your papers to someone less generous," she replied without hesitation. "Someone who will use you until you break, who will take without giving, who will see you as a thing rather than a man. The choice is yours, Rhaegar. Choose wisely." Another silence, longer this time. She could see the thoughts moving behind his eyes, the calculations and assessments. He was measuring her, just as she had measured him, trying to determine if her words were true or merely pretty lies designed to ensure compliance. Finally, he nodded once, sharp and decisive. "I accept your terms, Luma Bloodpetal. I will obey you." The words should have filled her with satisfaction, with triumph at having acquired exactly what she needed. Instead, she felt something else entirely, something that felt dangerously close to relief, to gratitude, to hope. She pushed the feeling down, buried it beneath the practical armor she had worn for so long. "Good," she said simply. "Come. We have a long journey ahead, and I would rather travel by moonlight than wait for dawn." She turned and began walking toward the edge of the courtyard, where her horse waited, not looking back to see if he followed. She did not need to. She could feel him behind her, could sense the weight of his presence like gravity pulling at her spine. When she reached her horse, she swung into the saddle with practiced ease, then looked down at him. "You will walk for now," she said, not unkindly. "Until I know you better, until trust is built between us. Tomorrow we will get you a horse of your own." He nodded, accepting this without protest, and fell into step beside her mount as she urged it forward. They left the auction house behind, riding out into the night where the moon painted the world in shades of mystery and promise. The journey to her estate took 3 days, and with each mile, Luma learned more about the man she had bought. He was quiet by nature, speaking only when spoken to, answering her questions with careful precision. He was observant, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, noting potential threats and escape routes with the instinct of someone trained in survival. He was strong, keeping pace with her horse without complaint, even when the terrain grew rough and the hours grew long. But there was something else. Something that emerged in small moments when he thought she was not watching. The way his hands would gentle when helping her dismount, careful not to grip too tight or startle. The way he positioned himself between her and any potential danger they encountered on the road. A merchant's cart that passed too close. A group of travelers who looked too interested in a woman traveling with only one companion. The way his eyes would sometimes lose their careful blankness and fill with something that looked like longing, like hunger, like dreams long denied. She found herself watching him in return, studying the way he moved, the economy of motion that spoke of deadly training and years of discipline. She noticed the scars that covered his body, some old and faded to white lines against his skin, others newer and still raised in red. Each one was a question she wanted to ask, a story she wanted to hear, but she held her tongue. Trust would come in time, or it would not come at all. Pushing would only drive him further behind the walls he had built around himself. On the second night, they made camp in a small clearing surrounded by ancient trees. Luma had brought supplies, including a bedroll for him and fresh clothes to replace his rags. She handed them to him without ceremony, then turned away to give him privacy while he changed. When she looked back, she caught her breath despite herself. Cleaned up, dressed in simple but well-made clothing that fit his frame, his hair pulled back from his face, he looked like something from legend. Like the heroes in old stories, warriors who could topple kingdoms or defend them with equal ease. The moonlight loved him, she thought, painted him in shades of silver and shadow that made him seem both more and less than human. He caught her staring and raised an eyebrow in question. She forced her expression back to neutrality, annoyed at herself for such an obvious reaction. "You clean up well," she said, her tone deliberately light. "Tomorrow we will reach my home. There are things you should know before we arrive." He settled onto his bedroll, his attention fully on her. She appreciated that about him, the way he listened with his whole being, missing nothing. "I live alone," she continued. "I have servants who come during the day, but they leave before nightfall. The estate is mine, inherited from my mother, who inherited it from hers, stretching back through generations of women who refuse to be bound by the expectations of others. We are of an old bloodline, one that carries certain gifts and certain burdens." He said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "I need you to give me children," she said bluntly, watching his face for a reaction. "Strong children who will carry on my line. That is the primary purpose I bought you for. But I need more than just a body to breed with. I need someone I can trust, Someone who will stand beside me. Someone who understands that power is not given but taken and held through strength and cunning. And if I give you these children, he asked quietly, what happens to me then? She had not expected the question, had not thought beyond the immediate need that had driven her to the auction. His words forced her to confront a future she had not yet planned. That depends, she said slowly, honestly, on who you prove to be, on whether you remain useful, on whether we can build something together that is worth maintaining. I make no promises beyond treating you fairly and giving you purpose. The rest we will discover as we go. He nodded, seeming to accept this answer. They fell silent then, the crackling of the fire the only sound between them. Luma found herself studying him again, wondering what thoughts moved behind those careful eyes, what dreams haunted him, what pain had brought him to that auction block. Sleep, she told him finally. Tomorrow will be a long day. He obeyed, settling back onto his bedroll and closing his eyes. But Luma lay awake for a long time, watching the stars wheel overhead, feeling the weight of what she had begun settling onto her shoulders like a cloak made of destiny and desire in equal measure. They reached her estate late the following afternoon, the sun hanging low and golden over the sprawling grounds. The house was beautiful in an austere way, all stone and dark wood, built to withstand time and siege in equal measure. Gardens surrounded it, carefully tended, full of rare flowers and herbs that grew nowhere else in the known world. The whole place felt separate from the ordinary world, protected by more than just walls and gates. Rhaegar said nothing as they approached, but she saw the way his eyes moved over everything, cataloging, assessing. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her home, whether he saw sanctuary or prison, possibility or trap. She showed him to his quarters, a room adjacent to her own, simply furnished but comfortable. There was a bed, a wardrobe, a window that looked out over the gardens. It was more than a slave had any right to expect, and she saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes before he controlled it. "This is yours," she said. "You may come and go as you please within the grounds, but you may not leave without my permission. In 1 week, I will come to you. We will begin the process of creating the children I need. Until then, rest, recover, learn the layout of the estate, make yourself at home." He turned to face her, and for a moment, the careful mask slipped, and she saw something raw and searching in his eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly, and the sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and left him there, closing the door behind her with a decisive click. Once alone in her own chamber, she let out a breath she had not realized she was holding and sank onto her bed, her mind spinning with thoughts she could not quite organize. What had she done? What was she beginning? She had thought she was buying a simple solution to a simple problem, but nothing about Rhaegar was simple. He was a mystery wrapped in scars and silence, a storm barely contained beneath the surface of careful obedience. And she found herself wanting to know him, wanting to unravel the secrets he carried, wanting to see behind the walls he had built so carefully around himself. Dangerous, she thought. This was dangerous in ways she had not anticipated, but she had never been one to turn away from danger, had never chosen safety over possibility. Whatever came next, whatever unfolded between them, she would face it as she faced everything else in her life, with courage, with cunning, and with the absolute certainty that she would survive it. The week passed in strange tension. They circled each other like wary predators, learning rhythms and boundaries, building something that was not quite trust, but was heading in that direction. She found him in the gardens sometimes, his hands gentle among the flowers, and would stop to talk about nothing and everything. He helped with repairs around the estate, his strength and skill making quick work of tasks that would have taken others days. She caught him reading in the library once, his expression absorbed, and realized with a start that this man she had thought might be a simple warrior had depths she had not imagined. The first time she found him in her library, she had paused in the doorway, watching him without announcing her presence. He sat in the old leather chair by the window, afternoon light streaming over his shoulder, completely absorbed in a volume of ancient poetry. His lips moved slightly as he read, and she saw the way his scarred fingers turned the pages with surprising delicacy. This was not a man who had been taught to read as an afterthought or necessity. This was someone who loved books, who found solace in words, who understood beauty beyond battle. "What are you reading?" she asked finally, stepping into the room. He looked up, and for just a moment, she saw something unguarded in his expression before the careful mask slipped back into place. "The Cantos of Meridian," he said, showing her the cover. "Your collection is impressive. I have not seen some of these volumes in years." "You know poetry," she said, settling into the chair across from him. A slight smile touched his lips. "My mother loved it," he said. "She would read to me every night when I was young. After she died, I continued the tradition, finding comfort in the rhythms and imagery. It seemed important to preserve that connection to her." Luma felt her heart twist at the vulnerability in his admission. "I am sorry for your loss," she said quietly. "My mother loved books as well. She built this library over decades, traveling to find rare volumes, copying manuscripts herself when she could not buy them. When she died, I promised I would protect it, expand it, honor what she created." They sat in comfortable silence for a time, the shared grief and love for their mothers creating a bridge between them. Then Rhaegar began to read aloud, his deep voice lending weight and music to the ancient verses. Luma closed her eyes and listened, transported by the beauty of his reading, by the emotion he brought to each line. When he finished, she opened her eyes to find him watching her. "That was beautiful," she said. "Thank you." "The honor was mine," he replied. "It has been too long since I had someone to share this with." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Luma felt the walls she had built around her heart trembling, felt the careful distance she had maintained threatening to collapse. She stood abruptly, needing space, needing time to process the feelings churning inside her. "I should let you read in peace," she said, her voice not quite steady, but she found herself returning to the library each afternoon, and each time he would read to her, and they would talk about the texts, about meaning and metaphor, about the way beauty could exist even in a harsh world. These conversations became sacred to her, moments of connection that went deeper than physical attraction or mutual benefit. Meals became rituals of careful conversation. She learned that he preferred silence to empty chatter, that he had a dry sense of humor that emerged in unexpected moments, that he was fiercely intelligent and well-educated despite his circumstances. He learned that she was ruthlessly practical, but not cruel, that she valued strength but respected mercy, that beneath her composed exterior lived a heart that had been hurt and had decided never to be vulnerable again. One evening over dinner, she found herself telling him about her past, about the man she had almost married years ago, the one who had wanted her wealth and status, but not her strength, who had tried to change her into something soft and compliant. "I sent him away," she said, staring into her wine glass. "I told him I would rather be alone forever than spend my life pretending to be less than I am. After that, I decided I would never give any man power over my heart again. I would use them for my purposes, yes, but I would never love them." Rhaegar was quiet for a long moment. "And now," he asked gently, "do you still believe that?" She looked up at him, meeting those dark eyes that seemed to see straight through every defense she possessed. "I do not know," she admitted. "You are not like anyone I have ever met. You make me question assumptions I thought were carved in stone." He reached across the table, his large hand covering hers. "I understand the fear of vulnerability," he said. "I was betrayed by those I trusted most. After that, I told myself I would never trust again, never open myself to that kind of pain. But Luma, I think perhaps we are both learning that protecting our hearts so completely means never really living. She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. It terrifies me, she confessed, this feeling growing between us. It was supposed to be simple. A transaction, children and security, and nothing more. But it is not simple anymore. No, he agreed. It is not. And I think we both know it never really was. And always, humming beneath their interactions like a current running deep and strong, was the awareness of what was coming. The purpose she had stated so bluntly. The intimacy that would be required. The potential that hung between them like a promise and a threat in equal measure. When the week ended, Luma found herself both eager and terrified. She dressed carefully that evening, choosing a gown of deep green silk that made her white hair seem even more ethereal, that hugged her curves and made her feel powerful and feminine at once. She took time with her appearance in a way she never had before, though she told herself it was merely about maintaining the authority of the moment. She went to his door as the sun set, painting the world in shades of amber and rose. She knocked, her hand steady despite the way her heart hammered. He opened the door immediately, as though he had been waiting. He too had dressed with care, wearing the finest of the clothes she had provided, his hair clean and loose around his shoulders, his beard trimmed to show the strong lines of his jaw. They stood there for a moment, the threshold between them, the weight of what came next pressing down on them both. "May I enter?" she asked, keeping her voice formal, controlled. He stepped aside, a gesture of invitation and submission both. She walked past him into the room, hyper-aware of the way the space seemed to shrink with both of them in it, the way the air felt charged and dangerous. She turned to face him, squaring her shoulders, calling on every ounce of courage and authority she possessed. "You know why I am here," she said. "I do," he replied, his voice low and rough in the dimming light. She expected him to wait for her command, to stand passive and obedient as he had been in all other things. Instead, he took a step toward her, and then another, until he stood close enough that she could feel the heat of him, could see the pulse beating in his throat, could smell the clean scent of him mixed with something darker and more primal. "Luma Bloodpetal," he said, her name on his lips sending shivers down her spine. "Before we do this, before we begin what cannot be undone, I need to tell you something." She swallowed hard, caught off guard by the intensity in his eyes, by the way he looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. "Speak," she managed. "You bought me thinking I was no one," he said quietly, "a nameless warrior fallen on hard times. And I let you believe that, because I was not yet sure what manner of woman you were. But I cannot take what you offer, cannot give you what you ask, without honesty between us." Her breath caught. "What are you saying?" He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his large scarred hand. The touch was gentle, reverent, completely at odds with the violence she knew those hands were capable of. "My name is Rhaegar Frostreach," he said, "and I am the rightful Alpha King of the Northern Territories. I was betrayed by those I trusted most, sold into slavery by my own council who wanted to place a puppet on the throne. I have been planning my revenge, waiting for the right moment to reclaim what was stolen. But then you bought me, and everything changed." Luma felt the world tilt beneath her feet. An Alpha King. She had bought an Alpha King at auction like a common slave. The absurdity of it, the danger of it, the sheer impossible reality of it crashed over her in waves. "Why tell me this now?" she whispered. "Because I want you to know who you are lying with," he said, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with devastating tenderness. "Because I want you to understand that when I give you children, they will carry royal blood. because I need you to know that I am not here because you command it, but because I choose it. I choose you, Luma. I have chosen you from the moment you stepped into that courtyard with moonlight in your hair and fire in your eyes. She stared up at him. This king disguised as a slave. This man who had turned her carefully ordered world into chaos. She should have been angry at the deception. She should have been afraid of the danger he represented, of the enemies who would come looking for him, of the political nightmare she had bought herself into. Instead, she felt something else entirely. She felt relief that he was more than she had thought, joy that he had chosen to trust her with his truth, and beneath it all, a fierce possessive pride that this magnificent, dangerous man had looked at her and decided she was worth honesty, worth choosing, worth everything he was offering in this moment. Then give me everything, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Give me truth. Give me trust. Give me children who will shake the foundations of the world. Give me all of you, Rhaegar Frostreach, and I will give you all of me in return. He smiled then, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to absolutely devastating. Then he kissed her, and the world fell away. What happened between them that night was beyond anything Luma had imagined. She had expected physical pleasure, perhaps even passion given the chemistry that had crackled between them all week. But this was something else entirely. This was the meeting of equals, of two fierce souls recognizing their match. He touched her like she was precious and powerful at once, like he could not decide whether to worship or devour her, and settled for both. She met him strength for strength, giving as good as she got, discovering that surrender and dominance could exist in the same breath, that power could be shared rather than hoarded. They learned each other's bodies with the dedication of scholars and the abandon of warriors, mapping scars and secret places, discovering what made the other gasp or moan or cry out. When he entered her finally, it felt like completion, like two halves of a whole sliding into place. They moved together with an instinct that felt older than thought, finding rhythms that built and built until they shattered together, gasping each other's names like prayers or curses or both. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the ruins of his bed, sweat cooling on their skin, hearts gradually slowing to something approaching normal. Luma traced the scars on his chest idly, her mind already spinning with the implications of what he had told her, of what they had just shared. "Tell me what happened," she said quietly. "Tell me how a king ends up on an auction block." He was silent for so long she thought he might refuse. Then he began to speak, his voice low and rough with old pain. "I trusted the wrong people," he said simply. "My chief advisor, Marcus Coldsteel, and my captain of the guard, Thorn Ashenfell. I thought they were loyal. I thought their years of service meant something. But they were ambitious, and I was in their way. They arranged for me to be taken during a hunt, drugged and transported far from my lands. By the time I woke, I was already sold to a merchant who specialized in exotic acquisitions. From there, I changed hands several times, each sale taking me farther from home, making me harder to trace. I was beaten when I resisted, starved when I did not perform the tasks assigned. I learned to hide who I was, to play the part of a broken man, to wait for an opportunity. And then I came along," Luma said. "And then you came along?" he agreed. "You paid a fortune for me without question. You offered me dignity when I expected cruelty. You looked at me like I was a man rather than a thing, and I knew I had found either my salvation or my damnation." "Which do you think it is?" she asked. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I think it might be both," he said. "I think you might be the most dangerous thing that has ever happened to me." She smiled against his chest. "Good," she said. "I would hate to be predictable." They fell silent then, comfortable in the aftermath of revelation and passion. But Luma's mind was already working, already planning. If he was a king, then he needed his throne back. If he had been betrayed, then his betrayers needed to face justice. And if she was going to bear his children, then she needed to ensure they would inherit a kingdom, not just a title. "We will get your throne back," she said decisively. He stiffened against her. "Luma, you do not know what you are saying. Marcus and Thorn have had months to consolidate power. They will have convinced the other lords that I am dead or unfit to rule. Taking back the throne will mean war, will mean risking everything." "Then we risk everything," she said firmly. "I did not buy you to watch you hide for the rest of your life. And I will not raise our children in the shadow of your stolen crown. We will plan carefully. We will be strategic. We will use every advantage we have. But we will take back what is yours." He looked at her for a long moment, something like wonder in his eyes. "You are extraordinary," he said quietly. "Terrifying and extraordinary." She grinned. "You better believe it," she said. "Now start talking. Tell me everything about your kingdom, your enemies, your allies. Tell me the layout of your castle, the strengths and weaknesses of your defenses. Tell me everything, and we will build a plan that cannot fail." They talked through the night and into the dawn, their bodies tangled together, their minds working in perfect synchronization. He described the northern territories, the harsh, beautiful land of ice and stone that he ruled. He spoke of the great castle of Frostreach Keep, built into the side of a mountain, its walls thick enough to withstand siege weapons, its halls filled with tapestries and treasures collected over generations. He told her about the lords who had sworn fealty to his family, about the ones he trusted, and the ones who would have sided with Marcus and Thorn out of ambition or fear. Luma listened, absorbing every detail, asking questions that revealed her own tactical mind. She had been trained as a warrior from childhood, had learned strategy and combat alongside poetry and politics. Her family's bloodline carried gifts that made them formidable in battle, abilities that had been cultivated and honed over generations. She began to see how she could use those gifts, how she could combine her strengths with his, how together they might accomplish what neither could achieve alone. As the sun rose and painted the room in shades of gold, they had the bones of a plan. It would require patience, preparation, and perfect timing. But it could work. It would work. The weeks that followed were a strange blend of domesticity and preparation for war. They trained together each morning, Luma testing his skills and finding them as formidable as she had suspected. He was a master of multiple weapons, his movements economic and deadly, his tactical mind sharp as any blade. She showed him her own abilities, the way her bloodline gifts allowed her to move with preternatural speed, to sense danger before it arrived, to heal from wounds that would kill others. The first morning they sparred, Rhaegar had been careful with her, holding back his strength, treating her like she might break. She had seen it immediately and called him on it. "Stop," she commanded, lowering her practice sword. "If we are going to do this, you need to fight me for real. I am not fragile. I am not weak. I need you to show me what you are truly capable of, or this training is worthless." He had studied her face, clearly conflicted. "I do not want to hurt you," he said. "You will not," she assured him. "My gifts protect me. Trust me to know my limits. Now, attack me like you mean it." What followed was a revelation. When he stopped holding back, when he moved with the full force of his considerable skill, she met him blow for blow. Her bloodline speed allowed her to anticipate his strikes, to move in ways that seemed impossible, to turn his strength against him. They fought across the training yard, their blades singing through the air, their bodies moving in a deadly dance that was almost beautiful. When she finally swept his legs and put her blade to his throat, they were both breathing hard, both grinning with the exhilaration of finding a true match. He looked up at her from the ground, admiration clear in his eyes. "You are magnificent," he said. "I have never seen anyone move like that." She extended her hand to help him up. "And I have never fought anyone who could keep up with me. We are well matched, you and I." "We are," he agreed. But there was something else in his voice now. Something that spoke of more than just combat compatibility. They trained like that every morning, pushing each other, learning each other's tells and patterns, building a synchronization that would be crucial when they faced real enemies. But the training became about more than just preparing for battle. It became another way they learned each other, another form of communication, another place where they could be completely honest and unguarded. After particularly intense sessions, they would sit together in the garden, cooling down, talking about technique and strategy. One morning, after she had managed to disarm him 3 times in a row, he shook his head in rueful admiration. "How did you learn to fight like that?" he asked. "Those are not skills taught to noble women, not even in families as old as yours. My mother believed that every woman should be able to defend herself," she explained. "She hired the best teachers she could find, masters from a dozen different fighting traditions. But more than that, she taught me to embrace the gifts our bloodline carries. Most people with abilities like mine try to hide them, to appear normal. My mother said that was a waste, that our gifts were meant to be honed and used. She was wise," he said, "and brave, to go against tradition so completely." "She was," Luma agreed, feeling the familiar ache of loss. "She died defending these lands from raiders when I was 17. She could have fled, could have saved herself, but she chose to stand and fight, to protect those who depended on her. I try to honor that choice every day." Rhaegar reached over and took her hand. "She would be proud of you," he said quietly, "of the woman you have become, of the strength you carry so well." The words settled into her heart, healing old wounds she had not realized still hurt. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. Luma realized with a start that she had never felt this comfortable with anyone, this seen and accepted. It should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like coming home. He watched her with undisguised admiration as she demonstrated her abilities in increasingly complex drills. "You are magnificent," he said after she had bested him in a sparring match for the 3rd time. "I have never seen anyone move like that." She grinned, wiping sweat from her brow. "My mother used to say our blood was touched by something ancient, something that predated kingdoms and crowns. I never knew if it was true or just a pretty story, but the gifts are real enough." "They are indeed," he agreed, pulling her close, despite both being sweaty and disheveled. "Our children will be unstoppable." The mention of children made her heart skip. They had made love countless times since that first night, their passion for each other only growing stronger with familiarity. But it was too soon to know if she had conceived, too soon to count on anything beyond the present moment. "One step at a time," she said, but she could not keep the warmth from her voice. In the afternoons, they planned. Rhaegar drew maps of his kingdom, marking allies and enemies, strategic points and vulnerable locations. Luma studied them until she could have walked the halls of Frostreach Keep blindfolded. They discussed various approaches, discarding ones that were too risky or too dependent on variables they could not control. Slowly, carefully, they refined their strategy. The castle of Frostreach Keep had one weakness, a series of old tunnels that ran beneath it, built centuries ago as escape routes in case of siege. The entrances had been sealed over the years, but Rhaegar knew of one that remained accessible, hidden in the forest several miles from the keep. If they could reach it undetected, they could infiltrate the castle, locate Marcus and Thorne, and capture them before their guards could respond. With the traitors in custody, Rhaegar could reveal himself to the gathered lords and reclaim his throne. It was risky. It required them both to be at their physical peak, to coordinate perfectly, to trust each other absolutely. But it was possible. It could work. As they prepared, Luma noticed changes in her body, a sensitivity in her breasts, a slight nausea in the mornings, a fatigue that came on unexpectedly. She said nothing at first, wanting to be sure, not wanting to hope too much. But when her monthly bleeding failed to arrive, when the signs became too obvious to ignore, she finally allowed herself to believe. She told him one evening as they sat in the garden, the setting sun painting the flowers in shades of fire. He had been talking about the loyalty oaths the Northern Lord swore, but she interrupted him mid-sentence. "Rhaegar," she said quietly, "I am pregnant." He went completely still, his eyes widening, his expression shifting through a dozen emotions too fast to track. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without a healer's confirmation," she said. "All the signs are there." For a moment, he simply stared at her. Then he moved, pulling her into his arms with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with his size and strength. "A child," he whispered against her hair. "Our child." She felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She was not one for crying. Had learned long ago that tears solved nothing and changed nothing. But something about the reverence in his voice, the joy mixed with fierce protectiveness, broke through her carefully maintained control. "Our child," she agreed. "The first of our line, the beginning of something new." He pulled back enough to look at her face, his own expression serious. "This changes things," he said. "I cannot ask you to risk yourself and the baby on this mission. We should wait until after the birth." "Absolutely not," she said firmly. "I am pregnant, not fragile. My abilities will protect me and the child both. And besides, time is not our friend. The longer Marcus and Thorne have to consolidate power, the harder they will be to unseat. We move forward as planned." "Luma," he began, but she cut him off with a look. "I did not buy you to protect me from the world," she said. "I bought you to stand beside me as we face it together. Do not start treating me like I am made of glass simply because I am carrying your child. Trust me to know my own capabilities." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well," he said. "But you will allow me to worry. That is my right as the father." "Worry all you want," she said, softening. "Just do not let it interfere with the plan." They spent the next month in intensive preparation. Luma pushed her body hard, ensuring she was at peak condition despite the early pregnancy. Her bloodline gifts seemed to strengthen rather than weaken, as though the child she carried amplified her natural abilities. Rhaegar watched her with a mixture of awe and concern, ready to catch her if she fell, but knowing better than to try to slow her down. They gathered supplies, weapons, provisions for the journey north. Luma arranged for her estate to be managed in her absence, leaving detailed instructions with her most trusted servants. She wrote letters to be sent if they did not return, ensuring her affairs were in order. It was practical, methodical preparation for what might be a one-way journey. Finally, when the moon waxed full again, exactly as it had been the night she bought him, they set out. The journey north took 2 weeks, traveling through territories that grew progressively colder and more harsh as they approached the northern territories. Rhaegar grew more tense as they drew closer to his homeland, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, his hand never far from his weapon. As they crossed into the northern territories proper, Luma noticed the changes immediately. The air grew sharper, carrying the bite of eternal winter. The landscape transformed into towering pine forests and jagged mountain peaks that clawed at the sky. The few villages they passed were built sturdy and low to the ground, designed to withstand brutal storms and heavy snows. "This is your home," she said. Not quite a question. "Yes," Rhaegar replied, his voice carrying a mixture of love and pain. "These are my lands. These are my people. Every mile we travel, every familiar landmark I see, reminds me of what was stolen, of how long I have been gone. They will welcome you back," she said with certainty. "They will rejoice to have their true king returned." "I hope you are right," he said quietly. "But Marcus and Thorne have had months to spread lies, to poison minds against me." Some will believe I abandoned them. Others may think I was weak, unfit to rule if I could be taken so easily. Reclaiming the throne is only the beginning. Rebuilding trust will take far longer. Then we will rebuild it together, she said firmly. One day at a time. One person at a time. However long it takes. He reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips. What did I do to deserve you? He murmured against her knuckles. You chose honesty when deception would have been easier, she replied. You chose vulnerability when walls would have been safer. You chose me, and I chose you back. That is all either of us needs to deserve the other. They avoided the main roads, keeping to forest paths and mountain trails. The terrain was treacherous, narrow paths winding along cliff edges where one wrong step could mean death. But Rhaegar navigated it with confidence, his childhood memories guiding them safely through. He showed her shortcuts and hidden ways, places where the forest grew so thick that even in winter they found shelter from the wind. Twice they encountered patrols, wearing the colors of Frostreach Keep, and had to hide or detour to avoid detection. Each near miss set Rhaegar's jaw tighter, made him more grimly determined to see this through. The first time, they pressed themselves into a narrow crevice between rocks, barely breathing as soldiers passed within feet of their hiding spot. Luma felt her gifts flare, ready to fight if necessary, but Rhaegar's hand on her arm held her still. Wait, he mouthed silently. They did not see us. He was right. The patrol passed without noticing them, and they continued on their way. But the encounter reminded them both of how dangerous this mission was, how easily it could all go wrong. The second patrol was larger, more alert. They had to circle far out of their way, adding hours to their journey, climbing higher into the mountains to avoid detection. The cold was brutal at that altitude, but Luma's gifts protected them both, creating a bubble of warmth around them that defied the frigid air. How are you doing that? Rhaegar asked, marveling as snowflakes melted before they could touch them. I am not entirely sure, she admitted. My gifts have always been strongest in moments of need. It is as though my body knows what is required, and simply does it. I suspect the child I carry amplifies the effect. He placed his hand on her still flat stomach, his expression filled with wonder and worry in equal measure. You are protecting us all, he said. Our child is already learning from you. The night before they reached the hidden tunnel entrance, they made camp in a small cave, building a tiny fire for warmth. Luma could feel the tension radiating off him, could sense the weight of what tomorrow would bring settling onto his shoulders. She moved to sit beside him, taking his hand in hers. Tomorrow we take back your throne, she said quietly. Tomorrow we set right what was made wrong. Are you ready? He turned to look at her, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. I am terrified, he admitted. Terrified that I will fail. Terrified that you will be hurt. Terrified that our child will never know their father because I am not strong enough or fast enough or clever enough to win. She squeezed his hand. I understand fear, she said. But I have learned that fear is only useful if it makes you sharper, more focused. Let it drive you forward, not hold you back. Besides, you are not alone in this. We face it together, and together we are stronger than either of us alone. He studied her face in the flickering firelight. How can you be so certain? He asked. How can you have such faith in us when we are walking into the heart of enemy territory, with no backup and no guarantee of success? Because I know what we are capable of, she replied. I have fought beside you. I have seen your strength, your intelligence, your determination. And I know my own capabilities. More than that, I know that some things are simply meant to be. We were meant to find each other. We were meant to stand together. And we are meant to reclaim what is rightfully yours. I feel it in my bones, in my blood, in the very core of who I am. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "How did I get so lucky as to find you?" he asked. "Luck had nothing to do with it," she replied. "Destiny brought us together. That moon that hung full over the auction house, the impulse that made me bid on you, the truth that you chose to share. All of it was meant to happen. We were meant to find each other." "You truly believe that?" he asked. "I do," she said firmly. "And tomorrow, we will prove it." They made love that night with a desperation that had not been there before, both aware that this might be the last time, that tomorrow could end with death or capture or worse. They poured everything they felt into each touch, each kiss, each whispered word. When they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, Luma rested her hand on her still flat stomach and made a silent promise to the child growing there. "I will protect your father," she vowed. "I will give you the kingdom you deserve." Dawn came too quickly. They broke camp in silence, checking weapons and supplies with the efficiency of experienced warriors. The hidden tunnel entrance was exactly where Rhaegar remembered it, concealed behind a waterfall in a narrow gorge. They had to wade through icy water to reach it, the cold biting through their clothes. But Luma's bloodline gifts kept her warm and protected the child she carried. The tunnel was dark and narrow, carved through solid rock centuries ago. They lit a small torch and moved forward carefully, Rhaegar leading the way. The passage climbed steadily upward, branching occasionally, but he navigated it with confidence born of childhood exploration and memory. It took hours to traverse the tunnels. They emerged finally into a storage room deep in the castle's foundations, dusty and clearly unused for years. Rhaegar extinguished the torch, and they stood in darkness, listening. No sound came from beyond the door. The castle slept, unaware that its rightful king had returned. They moved through the lower levels like ghosts, avoiding the few servants and guards who were awake at this early hour. Rhaegar led them unerringly toward the council chambers where Marcus and Thorne would be, planning their day, comfortable in their stolen power. Outside the chamber doors, they paused. 2 guards stood watch, alert and armed. Luma met Rhaegar's eyes in the dim corridor light and nodded. They moved as one, she taking the guard on the left, while he took the one on the right. Their attacks were silent and precise, rendering the guards unconscious before they could raise an alarm. They bound and gagged them quickly, then turned to face the doors. "Ready," Rhaegar whispered. "Ready," she confirmed. He pushed the doors open and they strode in together. Marcus Coldsteel and Thorne Ashenfell sat at a long table covered in maps and documents, deep in discussion. They looked up in surprise as the doors banged open, surprise turning to shock and then fear as they recognized who stood before them. "Impossible," Marcus breathed, his face going pale. "You are dead." Rhaegar smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "Rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command and fury both. "Did you really think you could betray your king and face no consequences?" Thorne reached for his sword, but Luma was faster. She crossed the distance between them in a blur of motion, her blade at his throat before he could draw his weapon. "I would not do that if I were you," she said pleasantly. "My king has questions, and you are going to answer them." "Who are you?" Marcus demanded, though his voice shook. "I am Luma Bloodpetal," she replied, "and I am the woman who is going to watch you pay for your treachery." What followed was not pleasant. Rhaegar was not cruel by nature, but he was thorough. He made Marcus and Thorne confess their betrayal, made them detail every step of their plot, every lord they had bribed or coerced into supporting them. Luma stood watch, her senses extended, alert for any sign that their presence had been discovered. When Rhaegar had extracted all the information he needed, he looked at his former advisors with cold contempt. "You will be tried for treason," he said. "And when you are found guilty, as you will be, you will face the full punishment the law allows. But first, you will help me reclaim what you stole." He forced them at sword point through the castle, gathering the lords who were in residence. Word spread quickly, and within the hour, the great hall was filled with nobles and soldiers, all staring in shock at the king they had thought dead, at the traitors bound and kneeling before the throne, at the fierce white-haired woman who stood at Rhaegar's side like a queen already crowned. Rhaegar addressed them all, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "I am Rhaegar Frostreach, rightful Alpha King of the Northern Territories," he declared. "I was betrayed by those I trusted, sold into slavery, lost to you for months. But I have returned, and I bring with me proof of the treachery that sought to steal your loyalty and your lands." He presented the evidence, the confessions, the documents proving the extent of Marcus and Thorne's deception. The gathered lords listened in growing horror and anger, many of them having suspected something was wrong, but lacking proof to act on their suspicions. When Rhaegar finished, he looked out over the assembly. "I claim my throne by right of blood and conquest both," he said. "But I will not rule as I did before. I was too trusting, too naive, too willing to believe the best of those around me. That changes now. I return to you as a king who has been tested and tempered, who has learned the cost of misplaced faith. And I return with a queen at my side." He turned to Luma, extending his hand. She took it, stepping forward to stand beside him. "This is Luma Bloodpetal," he said. "She found me when I was lost. She believed in me when I had forgotten how to believe in myself. She carries my child, the heir to this kingdom, and she will rule beside me as my equal in all things." The hall erupted in cheers and shouts, the lords banging their fists on tables, the soldiers stamping their feet in approval. Luma felt the weight of their acceptance settle over her like a crown, heavy and precious, and more than she had ever imagined wanting. Rhaegar leaned close, speaking for her ears alone. "Thank you," he said. "For everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For choosing me when you could have chosen anyone. For standing with me even when it meant risking everything." She turned to face him fully, rising on her toes to press a kiss to his lips, heedless of the hundreds of eyes watching. "I would choose you 1,000,000 times over," she whispered against his mouth. "In every lifetime, in every world. You are mine, Rhaegar Frostreach, and I am yours." The trial of Marcus Coldsteel and Thorne Ashenfell was swift and decisive. The evidence was overwhelming, their guilt undeniable. They were sentenced to death for treason. The sentence carried out in the courtyard of Frostreach Keep, 3 days after Rhaegar's return. Luma stood beside him as they watched justice done, her hand in his, both of them solemn with the weight of what had been necessary. "It is finished," Rhaegar said, as the last of his betrayers fell. "Now we can truly begin." The following months were a whirlwind of activity. Rhaegar worked to rebuild trust with his lords, to undo the damage Marcus and Thorne had done, to establish new protocols and protections to prevent such betrayal from happening again. Luma stood at his side through all of it, offering counsel, providing support, proving herself to be every bit the queen he had declared her. She was fierce in counsel, her sharp mind cutting through political maneuvering and false courtesy to reach the heart of every issue. She was diplomatic when needed, ruthless when necessary, and always protective of Rhaegar and the kingdom they were building together. As her pregnancy progressed, she felt the child growing stronger within her. Her bloodline gifts seemed to pass to the baby, creating a connection between them that allowed her to sense the child's health, their emotions, their developing personality. She knew, somehow, that this child would be extraordinary, would carry the best of both their legacies. Rhaegar was devoted to her in ways that made her heart ache with joy and gratitude. He attended to her every need without being overbearing, respected her independence while making clear his commitment, showed her daily that she was cherished and valued. The man who could be absolutely ruthless in dealing with enemies or political opponents would gentle completely when he touched her, would speak to her belly in quiet moments, would plan for their child's future with a mix of hope and determination that never failed to move her. When her time came, It was in the depths of winter, snow falling thick and heavy outside the castle walls. The labor was long and difficult, her bloodline gifts both helping and hindering, as her body fought to bring new life into the world. Rhaegar never left her side, holding her hand, wiping sweat from her brow, murmuring encouragement and love in equal measure. Finally, as dawn broke over the snow-covered mountains, their son entered the world with a cry that seemed to shake the very stones of Frostreach Keep. He was perfect, small and red-faced, and absolutely perfect. Rhaegar wept as he held his son for the first time, this fierce king reduced to tears by the miracle of new life. "He is beautiful," Rhaegar whispered. "He is everything." "He is ours," Luma replied, exhausted but glowing with triumph. "Our son, our heir, our future." They named him Aldrich, which meant wise ruler in the old tongue. And as Luma recovered and Aldrich grew, it became clear that he had inherited gifts from both his parents. He was strong like his father, fierce and determined even as an infant. But he also carried Luma's bloodline abilities, showing signs of the preternatural speed and healing that marked her family. The kingdom celebrated the birth of their prince with festivals that lasted for days. Gifts poured in from every corner of the realm and beyond. Lords came to swear fealty not just to their king but to his queen and heir. Frostreach Keep rang with joy and hope, with the sense that something new and good had begun. But Luma and Rhaegar were not content with just one child. They wanted a family, wanted siblings for Aldrich, wanted to ensure their line was secure. So when Aldrich was a year old, Luma found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect, her gifts adapting to the new life growing within her. Their daughter was born on a spring morning when the snow was finally melting and the first flowers were beginning to emerge from the frozen ground. She had her mother's white hair and her father's dark eyes, and from her first breath she was fierce and determined. They named her Lysara, which meant moonlight, a tribute to that full moon that had hung over the auction house the night everything began. With 2 children playing in the halls of Frostreach Keep, with a kingdom that prospered under their joint rule, with a love between them that only deepened with time, Luma and Rhaegar had built something extraordinary. They had taken betrayal and turned it into triumph, had found each other across impossible odds, had created a family and a future that exceeded anything either had dared to dream. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Luma would think back to that night in the auction house. She would remember the moment she had first seen him, the instant recognition that he was important, that he was hers. She had thought she was buying a man to serve her purpose, a means to an end, a transaction to solve a problem. She had been so wrong. She had not bought him at all. Destiny had brought them together. Fate had conspired to place him on that auction block, and her in that crowd. And what had seemed like a purchase was actually a collision of souls that had been seeking each other across time and distance. "You will obey me," she had told him that first night, not knowing she was speaking to a king, not understanding that his obedience was actually a choice, a gift, an act of trust that would change everything. He had obeyed. He had submitted, but not because she owned him. Because he had chosen her, had recognized in her the same fierce independent spirit that burned in his own chest, had seen in her eyes the possibility of partnership rather than servitude. They ruled together now, equal in power and authority, balanced in their strengths and weaknesses. He was the public face of the kingdom, the warrior king who led armies and inspired loyalty. She was the strategic mind, the one who saw 3 moves ahead, who protected the kingdom from threats internal and external. Their children grew strong and capable, learning combat and diplomacy, magic and leadership. Aldrich showed signs of his father's tactical brilliance, while Lysara had inherited her mother's gift for reading people, for understanding motivations and desires. Together they would be formidable, would rule even better than their parents when the time came. But that time was far away yet. For now, Luma and Rhaegar focused on the present, on building a kingdom that would last, on raising children who would be strong enough to face whatever challenges the future held, on loving each other with the intensity and devotion that had marked them from the beginning. One evening, years after that fateful auction, they stood together on the battlements of Frostreach Keep, watching the sun set over their domain. The mountains glowed in shades of amber and rose, the valleys below already filling with shadow. In the courtyard, they could hear Aldrich and Lysera playing, their laughter carrying on the wind. Rhaegar pulled Luma close, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on top of her head. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Buying a stranger at auction, taking such a risk?" She leaned back against him, secure in his strength. "Never," she said firmly. "That night changed everything. It brought me you. It gave me this life. It showed me that sometimes the most reckless decisions lead to the most beautiful outcomes. I was so lost when you found me," he said. "So broken. I did not think I could ever be whole again. But you saw something in me worth saving. You believed when I had stopped believing." She turned in his arms, looking up at his face. "You were never broken," she said. "Battered, yes. Hurt, absolutely, but never broken. Your strength was always there, waiting to be recognized and reclaimed." He kissed her then, slow and deep, a kiss that carried all the love and gratitude and devotion he felt. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "I love you," he said simply. "More than my kingdom, more than my crown, more than my own life. You are everything to me. And you are everything to me," she replied. "My king, my love, my equal, my home." They stood together as the stars began to emerge, as the moon rose full and bright over the northern territories, as their children's laughter filled the air. They had started with an auction and a command to obey. They had built an empire of trust and partnership and love. It was not the story Luma had thought she was writing when she entered that courtyard all those years ago. It was so much better, so much richer, so much more real. She had bought him thinking she was gaining a servant. Instead, she had found a king. She had commanded his obedience. Instead, he had given her his heart. She had sought children to continue her line. Instead, she had created a dynasty. And through it all, through every challenge and triumph, every danger and joy, they had stood together. Two fierce souls who had found their match. Two hearts that had recognized home in each other. Two lives that had collided and created something far greater than either could have achieved alone. The moon hung full over Frostreach Keep, blessing them with silver light. The same moon that had witnessed their beginning now watched over their happiness. And in its pale glow, Luma Bloodpetal and Rhaegar Frostreach, queen and king, wife and husband, held each other close and knew with absolute certainty that they had found what every soul seeks. They had found where they belonged. They had found who they were meant to be. They had found love in the last place either expected, and it had transformed them both into something magnificent. This was their story. This was their truth. This was their forever, forged in moonlight and sealed with trust, built on honesty and strengthened by partnership, blessed with children and crowned with love. And it all began with 5 simple words spoken in command that became instead a prophecy of choice and devotion. "You will obey me." And he had. Not because she commanded it, but because his heart demanded it. Because love, true love, is the only master worth serving. Because in obeying her, he had actually freed himself. And in commanding him, she had discovered that the greatest power lies not in dominance, but in the choice to stand beside someone as equals, partners in all things, for all time. The story that began with chains ended with a crown. the transaction that seemed so simple revealed itself to be destiny unfolding. The woman who bought a man discovered a king. The king who submitted to her command found his queen. And they lived, loved, fought, and ruled together, two halves of one whole, until the end of their days and beyond, leaving behind a legacy of strength, wisdom, courage, and above all, a love that changed the very fabric of their world. This was how a kingdom was saved. This was how a family was forged. This was how two souls, battered by circumstance and hardened by pain, found in each other the courage to be soft again, to be vulnerable again, to believe again. This was their happily ever after, earned through trial and sealed with trust, as real and solid as the stone walls of Frostreach Keep, as eternal as the mountains that surrounded it, as bright and constant as the full moon that had witnessed it all. And every year, on the anniversary of that fateful auction, they would stand together beneath the full moon and remember the beginning, honor the journey, celebrate the love that had carried them through everything, and give thanks for the destiny that had brought them together against all odds. "You will obey me," she had said, and he had answered with his life, his love, his loyalty, and his whole heart. Yes, always, forever. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this beautiful love story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.